Tommy Jaggi of Fansided here on the No Huddle show with NFL draft analyst Marcus Mosher. Marcus, last time, top quarterback prospects in the draft. We kind of broke down where they could potentially land, what to think of them in general. So if you missed that show, go check out the archived version, video version on YouTube, or the audio version on your favorite listening device. But today, Marcus, I want to talk about some of the big stuff that's been happening around the league as we lead up to the draft. And no news right now is big. We take a break for Aaron Rodgers just a second here to talk about Derek Carr in the Saints' current situation. So over the weekend, we discovered that Carr has a shoulder injury. Don't know when it happened. Don't know what the situation is here. But to the extent where he is even considering surgery, they would put that timetable back like another 6 months. The Saints were already in contention for a quarterback. Like, how does this change the game plan for New Orleans in the draft?
Yeah, so let's start with the Carr news. So it was reported by Ian Rappaport. It's some kind of shoulder injury that's going to at least hamper part of the 2025 season. I think the only issue is he going to miss the first month of the year, or is he going to miss the entire season? Because if it's just an injury that's going to keep him out for the first 3 or 4 games, you obviously don't change your draft plans at all, right? Like, hey, you can get through the first month, it's whatever.
Yeah.
But if he's going to miss the entire 2025 season, now that's a little bit different. He was already going into the final year of his contract with the Saints. And, this has been a spot where many mock drafters have put a quarterback at number 9 already. Does this make them even more likely to draft a quarterback at 9? Tommy, I don't think so. Because if you didn't love a quarterback 5 days ago, I don't think you're suddenly going to love them now that Derek Carr is hurt. Maybe you push the need up a little bit more. I guess I would still be somewhat surprised if they picked a quarterback at that spot.
Yeah, I feel like, is it like the desperate times call for desperate measures type of thing? Like, every organization is going to be different in their approach, but I agree it would be really bad philosophy overall to say, yeah, we didn't like them before, but now that Carr is hurt, suddenly our interest is piqued by the quarterbacks in this class. Like, I do think that that's a bit of a roster building malpractice right there. So I would be interesting to see which direction they go if this ends up being more severe than what we thought. Like, let's say Carr gets the surgery, and now we're looking at like an October or November timetable. Like, what is the answer here? And Marcus, I just look at the Saints in general, just the whole scope of the situation here, where now they've got a new head coach in there, and Kellen Moore. It feels like he's going to want to bring in his own guy anyway. And I know that Saints fans are furious with the Carr contract in general. Like, how did we hand this guy at 32 years old, a 4-year, $150 million contract? Like, can we just kind of turn the page and move on and start a new chapter with this franchise?
I don't think Kellen Moore is going to rush to make that decision, right? This is the first year he's been in there. I don't think he feels like I've got to get the quarterback situation right now in order to have success. I think they're going to give him a pretty long leash here. If this were Dennis Allen, like we had last year, and he's feeling the heat of maybe losing his job, I think that's where you could potentially see a panic move. But I don't get the sense that the Saints are in a situation where it's like, hey, we've got to draft a quarterback this year right now. We should mention they did draft Spencer Rattler in last year's draft. The year before that, they spent a 4th-round pick on Jake Haener. So at least they have some young quarterbacks on the roster. It just comes all back down to, do you love these quarterback prospects? And again, from everything we've heard, that hasn't been the case. I think they like Shedeur Sanders. I think they like Jackson Dart, but I don't think they love him enough to pick him at 9. I think it's more likely they take a positional player with that 1st-round pick. They've got their 2nd-round pick is at number 40 overall. They've got 2/3, 2/4. I wouldn't be surprised if they're a team that moves up from 40, maybe to go get a Jackson Dart if he falls, a Jalen Milroe. But I would be pretty shocked if they did draft a quarterback with that 1st pick.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, but the Saints don't seem too keen on Shedeur Sanders either. Like, this is a guy that I have not heard in connection with this organization, even though we've talked about on our last show how it seems like it would be kind of an ideal fit in terms of the scheme that you're going to run. You're playing inside in a dome, and Shedeur's skill set, I think, would be pretty well set overall in the NFC South there. But if the Saints don't have interest, they're not going to do it. So, like you said, maybe they hop back up. And I want to read this, Marcus, because this is from The Athletic. Brian DeFabo sat down with Dane Brugler, prominent NFL draft analyst, and he had this to say when DeFabo asked him about Shedeur Sanders specifically and if he can get past the Saints. And so this is what Brugler had to say. Obviously, the Browns and Giants at number 2 and 3 aren't going to give away their plans, but other teams believe there's a good chance that both pass on Sanders in the top 3. Not too surprising. I also believe the Saints will pass on him at 9, which could create a path for Sanders to make his way to the 21st pick. So this was in regard to the Steelers, setting up a question pertaining to the Steelers, but it doesn't sound like Dane thinks that there's a chance that Sanders goes there either.
No, I think you need to look at the types of quarterbacks that Kellen Moore has coached in the NFL. It started with Dak Prescott. Now, this is younger Dak when he was a little bit more athletic. They used a lot of read option. They utilized his legs a lot to help the offense. And then he goes to the Chargers, working with Justin Herbert, one of the most physically talented quarterbacks in the league. And then he goes to Philadelphia with Jalen Hurts, who's led all quarterbacks in rushing touchdowns each of the last 2 years. So I think he's going to want to get more of a toolsy quarterback that he can mold. He can use their athleticism. I like Shedeur Sanders, but that's not Shedeur. Shedeur is not a quarterback that you're going to want handling the ball 10, 12 times a game on the ground. He's not the guy that has a rocket arm to make plays down the sideline to Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. It's just not a good fit for Kellen Moore's offense, which is why I think they're going to pass and look elsewhere.
Yeah, and if you're the Saints right now, knowing your current situation and not wanting to have like a rough start to this new tenure with Kellen Moore, it's like, do you make a bid for Aaron Rodgers? Like, what is the next step for this team? How do you avoid just having like a dreaded season?
Well, I think they're probably going to have a bad season regardless. And I think that was going to be if Derek Carr was healthy or if he wasn't healthy. If you draft Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart, you're probably going to be a pretty bad team anyways. I think you're looking at best third in the NFC South. So this is a team that I think already knew they were going to be in a rebuild. And I think Kellen Moore's okay with that. I think they were going to use this year as an evaluation year to see which players they want to keep long-term, who they want to move off of. And then 2026 would be the year where they would start adding some more pieces. My bet or my guess here is that they're going to try to take a player at a money 5 position so that they can start to build this thing up the right way, whether it's an edge rusher, whether it's an offensive lineman. I wouldn't be surprised if a receiver is in the conversation as well. I have to assume that's where they're going.
Yeah, and I think that that's the right approach. You tear it down to the studs and build it up the way that you're supposed to. And the Saints have been in a bad financial state for a long time and kind of hoping to reset there and start anew. But I agree, don't reach for a quarterback. If you don't think that he's the guy, if he doesn't fit what you want to do, then there's no sense of taking that. And the feel is right now, the Sanders is not going to be that guy. And so then the question is, where does that slide stop? We can table that conversation if you want, and we can talk about the Browns and what they're going to do early in this draft, because obviously the Browns have a need for a quarterback, right? I mean, I don't think that Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett are the answer, as much as Browns fans might want to talk themselves into one of those guys there. Deshaun Watson's going to be done with the team. Where do they go here? Because they need to find a long-term answer, just like several of these other teams in the draft. But do they do it this year? Do they kind of maybe take a day 2 pick and try to get back up into the draft? And that way they can still land a maybe like franchise altering player.
So I don't think the Browns are going to leave this draft without picking a quarterback at some point in the first 2 days. They kind of have to add somebody here, right? But there's just no way they're going to take a quarterback at 2. They're not trading out of that pick. It's probably going to be Travis Hunter. So now we turn our attention to the later part of round 1, top of round 2. They have pick 33. There's a chance that a Jackson Dart is available at that spot. But with Cleveland having a lot of mid-round picks and a clear need at quarterback, I expect Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski to be incredibly proactive in going to get their quarterback. And one of the rumors that's been out there the whole time is that Cleveland likes Shedeur Sanders, but they don't love him. They think he's a good fit in Kevin Stefanski's offense, but he's not the type of quarterback you take at 2. but is he the type of quarterback you
Mm.
maybe take at 20? Because moving up from 33 to 20 wouldn't cost you a lot. You could do that without having to give up a future first round pick. You give some, middle round pick swaps or whatever you need to do. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's what they're going to try to accomplish. Get Travis Hunter at pick 2, the best player in the draft, and then go get an intriguing quarterback prospect in the middle round of the first round. I've got to believe
Mm.
Shedeur Sanders, Jalen Milroe are the two quarterbacks they're targeting.
Yeah, and if Sanders is the guy that they want, I mean, that the guy that they're willing to jump back into the middle of the first round for, maybe 20 is the spot that you need to go. Steelers sitting there at 21. Obviously, I follow the Steelers full time, and draft trends, we can kind of see the tea leaves here. We can see where their interests lie. And based on last year's class, and now we've got a 2-year sample of their front office with Omar Khan and Andy Weidel running the show. Last year, they drafted and they very much targeted players that they spent top 30 visits on. And if that trend continues again this year, that fits the mold of a Shedeur Sanders, who now we know that he was in the facility for a pre-draft visit. They also reportedly met with him at the NFL Combine as well. So he's checking the boxes there. This team obviously has an enormous need at quarterback. You've got Mason Rudolph, Skylar Thompson on the roster. So maybe 20 is the spot where the Browns would have to come back up and get their guy. Do you think it's like a one guy or nothing situation here for Cleveland? Like, are they going to like several prospects enough where they would still jump back into the first round, or would they just stand pat
I
at
think
that
there's
point?
two. I think it's Shedeur Sanders and Jalen Milroe. Now, Milroe, we talked about him on last week's show. I understand the concerns about Milroe. He's not ready to be a starting NFL quarterback. However, his offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees, was the offensive coordinator at Alabama in 2023 when Milroe had his best season. And I think you put him into Kevin Stefanski offense that utilizes a lot of stretch runs, stretch zone runs, a lot of play actions, a lot of boots. I do think that's an offense that could suit him well. He's also really good at throwing the ball down the field. And if you've got Travis Hunter on your team, you want a quarterback that can make plays down the field. I actually think Milroe playing behind Kenny Pickett and Joe Flacco for a year, letting him develop, letting him get up to the speed of the NFL is pretty good. Now, I don't want to compare him to Lamar Jackson, but Lamar Jackson did sit behind Joe Flacco for a half a season, and that worked out pretty well. I think it's those two quarterbacks they're targeting. And I think Cleveland's going to be aggressive, not only trying to get the 5th-year option, but making sure that the Steelers don't snipe one of them. So at this point, I would be shocked if Cleveland doesn't make a move up into the 20s and maybe even the late teens to go get that quarterback.
Yeah, and I guess if you like a guy enough, that's what you do. Marcus, you and I both do our own homework on these prospects. We watched film until after midnight last night, but we have our evaluations. There are guys that we like. There's guys that we're not as fond of. I know you like Milroe better than I do. I have got my concerns in terms of the general accuracy, the decision-making, all that kind of stuff. Is the gap between the two, and I know that scheme fit matters here a lot. So how much would you weigh the scheme fit if you're a team like the Browns, or if it's like, we've got a round grade higher on Shedeur, half a round grade higher. We might not like him as well for the fit or the athletic traits that we desire, the arm that we desire. How do you measure like the gap between scheme fit and just your overall evaluation of a prospect? Like what's
Fit
the gap
is all
between
that
them?
matters at the quarterback position. You can have a guy that's insanely talented, but if he doesn't fit your offense and he doesn't fit your scheme, it's not going to work, right? There are plenty of quarterbacks in the league, and I'm thinking of like Anthony Richardson, who's playing in an RPO style offense with Shane Steichen. It's just never going to work because he's not accurate enough to play in that scheme. So if you like the scheme fit between Milroe better than Shedeur Sanders, you just take Milroe and don't worry about how everybody else has these quarterbacks ranked. And I do think in a Kevin Stefanski offense where it's easy reads 1-2 and take off and run, I do think Milroe is a better fit. Would I trade up to go get him? Probably not. I don't see a team between picks 20 and 32 that's going to gamble on Milroe. But I can understand how in their offense, they could think that's a better fit than Shedeur Sanders, who I think you're always going to worry about limit like his athleticism, and his arm talent. Where for Jalen Milroe, you don't have that concerns. There's no concerns about what he can do as a runner. There's no concerns about his arm strength cutting through the wind in Cleveland, in Pittsburgh, in Cincinnati. I almost expect that
Mm.
pick now in the draft.
Marcus, I've got my reserves about that line of logic. I really do. And for me, it's like if you think that a one player is better than the other. In this case, I think that Shador is better than Milrow. I just think he's a better quarterback in
I would
most of the
agree.
things he does. Obviously, not the athletic traits and the rushing ability. And I think that a lot of people agree, right? I think that Sanders is the consensus number 2 quarterback, at least in our world here. In look from the outside looking in, we don't know how all NFL execs think, but I think that he's just a better football player. And even look at like Dane Brugler's board, where Shador is 34th overall compared to the 73rd overall player in Milrow. It's like I do understand the scheme fit matters a lot. I would tend to lean the other direction still and say I want the better quarterback, and I'm going to. I think what a good coaching staff should also do, though, is work around the player and say we got the better player than the one that we could have otherwise had, and I want to work around that. Totally understand the logic of where they were coming from, but in Shador's case specifically, like I don't necessarily think he's a great fit in the AFC North. And so I get where you're coming from there. It's like you need an arm that cuts through that wind and cold and ice and whatever. You're going to be playing January football, and you're going to be doing so against teams that also play in cold weather in the playoffs. And so I do think that having the bigger arm and the traits in the guy that fits a scheme does matter more for some divisions than it might for others. But more often than not, I would lean the other way and say, I just want the better overall player.
Yeah, and I totally understand. I do think the division and where you play matters. And when you're playing in those bad weather cities and you're going to be playing in playoff games that have, negative temperatures, it does matter. And this is one of the
Mm.
issues I've had. I'm a huge Tua Tagovailoa fan with the Miami Dolphins, but he plays in a division where you're going to be playing in a bunch of cold weather
Mm.
games. You can put up a lot of great regular season stats, but when you get to these bad weather games, it doesn't matter how good of a talent you are. It's just not a good fit within the conference, within the division. And I think that's something that Pittsburgh and Cleveland, who are both searching for their quarterbacks, are going to have to consider. If you feel like you're going to have to limit your offense in the most important months of the season because your quarterback doesn't have the tools to throw that 18-yard comeback route, I just don't even know if I would consider that player.
Yeah, I get that. And then that's kind of what makes the Kenny Pickett selection interesting. A couple years back for the Steelers, you drafted a historically small-handed quarterback who has to play with gloves on his hands and didn't have a big arm. And so it's not hard to say he's back in the AFC North now with the Browns this time around. But some of those same concerns were there for Miller. We had his hands measured at the Senior Bowl. I know we talked about this before, but 8 3/4, that's really, really small. It comes way under that 9-inch threshold. Obviously, he was able to work on those stretching that thumb and pinky and get that hand size up. Is Milrow's hand size a concern for you all if he ends up playing
A
in the
little
AFC
bit,
North?
but the good thing with Milrose, he's got the velocity in the arm that I just don't worry about what he's going to be able to do when the
Mm.
weather gets bad. And I actually think his game makes a lot of sense when you get into bad weathers because he can throw the ball. He's got that velocity, but he's also got the athleticism where if you're in one of these snow games and you need your quarterback to run the ball 16 times, he's got no problem doing that at all. We've seen even someone like Josh Allen, who was far more accurate, have to buckle down and, hey, we're just going to limit our passing attempts and run the ball. I do think that's where Milrow might make more sense in the division than is Shador Sanders.
I get that. We're going to shift the conversation away from quarterbacks. If you want to hear more about quarterbacks, Marcus and I broke this down on our first No Huddle show last week on Stacking the Box. Go check that out. But I want to talk about Will Johnson now, prominent cornerback prospect from Michigan. And last year, if we were having a conversation about Will Johnson this time, we're talking about like this is like a top 5 pick in the draft. All of a sudden, like this past year has not been kind to him. Gets injured a bunch. Didn't play particularly well at times, showed some inconsistencies, obviously has tremendous ball skills, but there were talks about his arm length at the NFL Combine, 30 and an eighth.
Mhm.
I mean, that's way under the threshold that most teams look for a boundary cornerback. And then you couple all of this with the fact that in his workout, Marcus, he wanted to do everything except run the 40-yard dash when we had concern about his time speed. So speak on Will Johnson for a minute. And what does this mean? Are we going to see a draft slide because of
It's
everything
been a
that's
pretty
transpired.
rough pre-draft process for Will Johnson, and you mentioned all the concerns. Like he's not a fast corner. Todd McShay reported today that he's been running in the 4.5s in pre-draft training, so there's just no reason to go out there and run that time,
Mhm.
right? Like leave it up to mystery. Maybe teams are assuming you're a 4.55 corner, whatever. He's had the multiple lower body injuries, including a hamstring injury that he suffered in the pre-draft training process. It hasn't been good for him at all. However, he's so clearly the best cornerback in this class outside of Travis Hunter, and there's such a need for corners in the league that I think he's still going to go top 11. I think the 49ers at pick number 11 are his floor, because if you're waiting to the second round to get a corner, you're just not going to find a guy that has his
Mhm.
ball skills and his big time production. It's been rough. I just don't know. I think there was a chance if he had a good junior season, he could have been a top 5 pick. He might be like the 10th or 11th pick now. It's going to hurt him a little bit, but not too much. Yeah.
So you still think he goes that high after all this? I mean, teams are not willing to say, look at this list of red flags. You played 6 games last year. You've got 30-inch arms. You might run a 4.55. You might run a 4.6. You add the 6/100s on. If he had ran at the combine, maybe he's closer to a 4.6 guy, and that is concerning. I looked at Mock Draftable's database just today. They've been keeping track of every cornerback that's run at the combine since 1999. And cornerbacks who run 4.55 or worse, the hit rate on those guys is so small. Now, obviously, he's an exceptional prospect, so that's going to make it more likely that he hits. But my kind of thought, and I've thought this for a while now, and Will Johnson, I think he needs to play in a very specific scheme where you can see the play developing in front of you. You're playing off coverage, you're playing zone coverage, a scheme where you can kind of snap down on routes and read the quarterback's eyes and undercut the ball and take it the other way. That's where he's going to be best. He's not a scheme universal prospect, is he? Like, he can't come and play like a bump and run man coverage. If you've got that kind of scheme, are certain teams just going to be out on him?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't think if you're playing a very heavy man to man scheme, you're probably out. And teams that value like the cover 2 corners up with the 32-inch arms just aren't going to like him. But this is one of the funny things about the draft, because if he were in last year's class, he probably goes in the 20s, not because of the players in the class, just because of the needs. There just wasn't very many teams inside the top 20 that needed cornerbacks.
Mhm.
But in this year's class, there's 3 of the top 11 teams have some of the worst cornerback rooms in the league. Let's go through them a couple real quick.
Mhm.
The Raiders, here are their starting cornerbacks right now: Jacorian Bennett, Sam Webb, and Darnay Holmes. Those are their 3 cornerbacks. Then you go to the Saints at 9. Their cornerbacks right now, after losing Paulson Adebo and Marshawn Lattimore, are Alante Taylor, Kool-Aid McKinstry, and Rico Payton. You go to the 49ers at pick number 11. Their corners are Rolando Green, Trey Brown, and Darrell Luther. All of these teams
Mhm.
desperately need cornerbacks, and he's just so clearly the best player available at the position that I would be shocked if he gets past 11. In fact, I almost would be shocked if he gets past the Saints at 9, because they have such a dramatic need at that position.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Everybody needs cornerbacks, and you need a ton of them, just like wide receivers. It's the opposite side. You're trying to stop these guys. Is there any teams out there, though, that we know that Travis Hunter, if the Browns or whoever drafts him decides to play him at all at cornerback, he's the best cornerback in this class. But assuming he plays wide receiver, then the conversation switched to Will Johnson. Is there any of these teams out here, do you think, that might value a guy like Jahdae Barron more than that? I mean, an inside-outside versatile cornerback, even though his arms came in even shorter. We're
That's the
talking
thing.
29 and change.
And
So,
that's the thing with Barron, is you're talking about
yeah.
another slot corner with shorter arms who's older. There's just not a corner that's going to jump in. Siobhan Ravel from
Mm,
East Carolina, he's only played, I think, 14 games, and he's coming off the torn
coming off the
ACL.
injury.
Yep. Trey Amos doesn't have the quick twitch either. He's not a particularly fast corner. So no, like if you want an outside corner that can play in zone and that can create plays, it's Will Johnson or bust.
Is it too early to say where is he going to stack up on your board? And do you think that he gets overdrafted or drafted on value pick?
Probably is going to be right about on value. The ball skills are still really good, and we saw that
Mhm.
2023 tape was unbelievable. And I thought, going into the year, it was going to be a surprise if he wasn't a top 5 pick, and just so many things went poorly for him. I do think there is a little part of this where these corners are a little bit up and down. We saw Derek Stingley have a fantastic freshman season. His next 2 years were a little rough. Uh, Terrion Arnold was the same way. I thought his final season wasn't as good as his sophomore season. I just think people are going to turn on the tape and see this guy that's making a bunch of big time plays at Michigan, and they're going to draft him high. And the other thing is, he's got Jim
Mm.
Harbaugh in his corner, telling every team inside the top 10 how good of a player he is. Again, I would be shocked if he falls very far.
Yeah, I mean, I get everything that you're saying right now, but I also think that in the NFL draft, it's all about projecting forward, not looking at what's happened in the past. And if I project forward with Will Johnson, and if I say, let's say this guy runs mid 4.5s, if there's one position we know that speed does absolutely matter, it's cornerback. Like, you have to be able to react to lightning fast wide receivers and stay in their hip pocket and not get torched down the field. And it's why slow cornerbacks have a really, really hard time carving out roles in the NFL. And it wasn't just the lack of a 40, it was everything leading up to that. It was our suspicions already just watching him on film, some of the things that we have heard. And then he goes and runs what, a 13 percentile 20-yard shuttle here too. That doesn't help his case,
No,
even in terms of like the fluidity, quickness aspect of things. Like, I think that I'm going to knock him more than maybe what some other draft analysts would, because of just all of the tea leaves leading up to this point with Will Johnson. Like, so much so that, like, if he falls in the early 20s, I would still question the pick and say, does he fit my scheme? Can I trust him to be this guy that's going to be a lockdown corner for me if he doesn't have the traits to be that guy? And I think that's what's so concerning. We compare to like last year's class, like Quinion Mitchell. Yes, he was small school, but he was a tremendous athlete that still had ball skills. Cooper DeJean could play inside, outside, ball skills, terrific athlete. Like, I just think that when you do comprise a list of things that matter, ball skills is near the top for cornerbacks, but also you've got to have speed. And then if you sort it the other way and look at just fast cornerbacks, usually fast cornerbacks have a tendency to work out. We're already seeing that kind of with like Nate Wiggins last year, who was blazing fast. There were other questions about him, the overall length, the overall mass to his frame, but he looks like he's going to be a good cornerback in the NFL. Like, do you weigh this any more heavily? And should it be more talked about than what it is?
I think it depends on the scheme because Will Johnson is such a zone heavy corner. I just don't think it's all that big of a deal. Now, again, if you have a man-to-man scheme where you need him to follow receivers and match up athletically and physically with those guys, I would be concerned. I don't think he's going to fit certain schemes. But the three teams we mentioned, the Raiders, the Saints, and the 49ers all play a
Mhm.
lot of zone, a lot of cover two, a lot of cover three, which is just going to let him keep his eye on the quarterback and jump routes, which is what he does so well. I also think it helps that Devin Witherspoon in the 2023 draft went fifth overall to the Seahawks. And he was not a particularly fast corner, didn't run a
Mhm.
40. A lot of people expected him to run in the 4.5s, in the 180s. Who made that pick in
Yeah.
2023? That was Pete Carroll. I wouldn't be surprised if the Raiders at pick number 6 are eyeing Will Johnson because they have one of the worst cornerback rooms in the league, and they're going to be playing a zone heavy scheme as well.
Yeah, I get that. And let's assume now for a second that he does go that high in the draft. Travis Hunter's off the board, obviously. Will Johnson goes inside the top 10 picks. What does that mean for like the rest of the cornerback outlook in this class? Are we seeing Trey Amos jump into the first round? Does anybody join him? Is Siobhan Ravel or anybody else? Like, is that too rich for those guys? Or because of the need of the position, our team's going to maybe what we might call reach late in the first round to get a cornerback?
It's pretty rare that we see only a few corners go in the first round. And generally, we see 4 or 5 corners. And I would expect that to be the case. There's just not very many of them. And you need so many in the NFL. And what a lot of these playoff teams are doing is they're just gobbling up these corners every year because it's really hard to find them. In free agency, you're way overpaying guys that are number 2 corners who are at the back end of
Mhm.
their careers. So I think, we saw Nate Wiggins go in round 1. We saw Emmanuel Forbes go inside the top 20. Now, obviously that was a reach,
Mhm.
but I think you're going to see that again this year. I think Trey Amos, Maxwell Harrison, and Siobhan Ravel all go in the first round, if not in the first round, inside the top 35. And I think someone like Amos, who is really rising up the boards, I think like Buffalo is a good fit. I think the Rams are a good fit. I think Baltimore is another good fit. I would expect multiple of these corners to kind of go in that 20 to 30 range, because this is not the deepest cornerback class we've seen. It's
Mhm.
not a very good class on day 2 and day 3. Get those guys early and then fill in the rest of your needs elsewhere.
Yeah, and Marcus, I think those type of selections, though, they would jumpstart this philosophical argument like value versus need. Are you taking a valuable player where you're picking right here? Can I get a guy that's perhaps in a grade tier higher, but because I have a need at cornerback, I'm going to take one anyway? And I feel like a lot of teams do fall into this trap. Now, it's important to find that sweet spot where the value and the need intersect. But I do feel like, to me, some of those picks feel pretty rich for late in the first round, especially considering I know you don't do the half round grades. I have a lot of 1-2 graded players this year. I think that in the 20s, you can get a handful of those guys there. I won't be as high on Hairston, as high in Revel because of the injury stuff, even though I do think that he's a very good player. So how would you weigh the value against the need if you're one of these cornerback needy teams? Obviously, it's not like every team just has one need that they have to fill. You could go elsewhere, but then you run the risk of maybe not getting a starting cornerback in this class.
A lot of it just depends on what's available. But like if you're a team, let's use the Ravens, right? They've got a need at guard. They've got a need at corner. They could use some more edge rush help. If you're on the clock and the top players available are like Malachi Starks, Nick Imanwari, maybe it's Gray Zabel, like those are good players, but you can find safeties and you can find interior offensive linemen on day 2, day 3. You're not finding a cornerback with length and athleticism like Maxwell Harrison, or physicality and run support like Trey Amos. So maybe, yes, you're reaching a couple spots, but you're getting a much more valuable position and one that's a lot harder to find in the draft.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where sequencing matters so much, right? We know there are certain positions that you can find quality players later. Cornerback is historically not one of them because there just aren't very many players out there that have the size, length, and speed to play on the boundary. I expect all of those guys to get gobbled up early.
Yeah, Marcus, let's shift over now and let's talk about the Patriots here at number 4. I mean, we've teased what their pick could be. You and I have walked through a live mock draft before. You get to that number 4 selection, it's like really boils down to a couple of things. It's like you could take an offensive tackle, Will Campbell or Armand Membu. You could take maybe even like Ted McMillan there. You said, and you haven't told me what this is going to be yet, but I'm interested if you have a surprise selection here for the Patriots they could just catch us off guard with.
Got two. Let's first start with why it might be something different than an offensive tackle. Armand Membu is a right tackle. That's the only position he's played. The Patriots paid a lot of money to Morgan Moses, who is a career right tackle this offseason. I don't envision them selecting a right tackle only with that spot. And Will Campbell is, I think, a left tackle, but I don't know if he's a left tackle for the Patriots. And that's kind of been the rumblings out of Foxborough the last couple of weeks, is they like the leadership, the physicality of Will Campbell. They don't know if he's necessarily the best fit in Josh McDaniels' offense. And there's also a lot of good round 2 offensive linemen, whether you want to go with a Gray Zabel or Tyler Booker or maybe a Josh Simmons or Josh Connerly. I think there are going to be options available to you in round 2. But what you might not be able to find is a running back like Ashton Genty, who is easily the best running back in this class. And I think they just could talk themselves into, hey, let's get an awesome player to pair with Drake May. I think that's too rich personally for a running back on a team that is still away. But I do wonder if Jalen Walker, the edge from Georgia, who feels like a Mike Vrabel player through and through. He's physical. He's versatile. The leadership stuff is off the charts. He won several awards at Georgia for his character. Kirby Smart, the coach at Georgia, cannot stop raving about him. Mike Vrabel wants culture changers, and that is Jalen Walker. They need edge rush help. Keon White and Harold Landry are their 2 edge rushers now. They need somebody that can come in, play multiple spots. I won't be surprised if Jalen Walker is who they end up picking at 4 by the time we get to next Thursday.
You did catch me off guard with that. But I want to, let's take time and have offer the rebuttal here to each of these selections. Genty, I love as a prospect. And the way that I stack my board, I don't consider positional value. I just do the best overall prospects. Though when I go to draft these players, if I was in charge, I would obviously very much consider positional value, and knowing that the running back is kind of a devalued position, I have a hard time going that early, number 4 overall pick, even though
I would agree.
Gentry's probably going to be my number 2 player, even ahead of Abdul Carter. I just think he's that good of a running back prospect. But I would have my reserves about taking a running back there on a team that needs so many things, that couldn't score points last year. And I'm not sure if drafting a running back is the best way to help you score points. I think there's better methods than that even. That would be a curious decision, I think, for a team like the Patriots right now, who could really go a number of directions. They just have so many needs. They need star power everywhere on their roster.
But But I'll say that, I mean, Mike Vrabel's had a lot of success, and again, I'm not
Mhm.
advocating for this, I'm just presenting the argument. He's had a lot of success with a dominant
Sure.
running game with Derrick Henry, and that's why they were able to overachieve so often in Tennessee and get to the AFC Championship game with subpar offensive lines, because they had a really good running back. And I wouldn't be surprised if they just say, "Hey, Genty, top player on our board. We love his character. We love his tackle breaking ability. Let's bring him in, and we'll fix the offensive line on day 2."
Yeah, and I want to bring this back to sequencing because we talk about this all the time, but let's play this out then here for the Patriots and just kind of make a couple assumptions here. If the Patriots draft Genty at pick 4, is it better to have Genty and then when their second round pick comes around, you're looking at it, what offensive tackle do you think is going to be available there?
I think there's Connerly, Simmons is potentially there. If you want to go with a guard, you can probably get Gray
Okay.
Zabel or Tyler Booker at that
So
spot.
let's call it something like Genty and Josh Simmons. Or Genty and Josh Connerly. Would you rather have Genty and Connerly, or would you rather have a sequencing that's like Armand Membu, which you might not think that they might move him around? Okay, we'll call it Will Campbell. I like Membu more personally. Well, let's say Will Campbell at left tackle for you now. And then in the second round, get a guy like Travion Henderson or Quinshawn Judkins. Like, does it make more sense to value the money 5 position with the first pick?
Yeah, well, I don't think Travion Henderson's going to be there. We can talk about that
Mhm.
maybe next week. But I think in a vacuum, Campbell and Judkins is probably the better pairing. I do like Will Campbell, but if they don't feel like Will Campbell's a fit for their offense, and you're only getting a average to maybe a slightly above average left tackle, I could understand the logic behind taking Ashton Genty, but that's not personally where I would go with that spot either. I think the Jalen Walker discussion is more interesting because now you're at least talking about a money 5 position
Mhm.
and a massive need on their roster as well with an edge rusher.
Yeah, Jalen Walker, you and I have butted heads on this a little bit. I think that Jalen Walker is a football player through and through. He's a football player. He's a coach's guy. He will do what you want him to do. I just have such big concerns that I just don't know what to do with this guy. Is he a full-time edge? Do you get creative with him? Do you have him play the off-ball linebacker in early downs and then rush off the edge in pass rush situations? Like, I just don't know what you do with this guy. I do think that Vrabel is creative enough to be the guy who gets the most out of him. So I will say that I think that the landing spot with the Patriots would be relatively good. It's just this is a really rich pick for me. I got to be honest. I know that his over under is high. I know he's minus 350 to go in the top 10 or whatever this year. And that's
Yep. Yep.
I don't view him that highly. I've got a lot of questions about him. I think that he had some inconsistencies this year. I think he's got a lot of moves that need to be developed as a pass rusher. I think what he does best, honestly, is just run and chase stuff right now. But what kind of player are you getting with the number 4 overall pick? Like that you're picking high enough in the draft in a class, mind you, that includes some really good prospects, like elite level prospects. Are you getting the biggest bang for your buck by taking Jalen Walker here?
I mean, I think so. I think Jalen Walker is one of the top 5 players in this class. And then when you factor in positional value, you jump him over running backs and some of these other positions. I think Jalen Walker in a New England style defense, which is obviously what he would be in with the Patriots, where you're moving him around, getting him in the best matchups. You're playing him in a more 3-4 where he can be off the ball, and you've got big guys up front that can protect him. I think this is a really, really good spot for him. Now, we've also seen the league get a lot smaller when it comes to these edge rushers. The average weight of the top 10 players in sacks last year was 250 pounds. And you had several guys under 245 pounds. We saw someone like Nolan Smith at 235 pounds get drafted in round one. We've seen someone like Hassan Reddick, who's played at 230 at 6'1", be one of the best sack players in the league. So I think in New England, where they would be open to moving him around and creating the best matchups, I do think Jalen Walker, of all the teams in the top 10, I think his fit in New England is probably the best.
I agree with the fit. I do think the fit is good, but I don't really want to make the exception to the means the standard here either. For a guy that's going in the top 4 picks in the draft, I mean, Jalen Walker came in at 6'1" and 243 pounds with 32-inch arms. He's undersized, and there's no doubt about it. Like, unless she's playing off-ball linebacker, he's going to be undersized for the position. I would just like to know, like, who do you think this guy is going to be in the NFL? If you had to give him like a pro comp, because I just don't see anyone realistically that I would like enough that fits that profile. Because I'm not going to comp him to a guy who is significantly larger and more polished as a pass rusher. I just don't think that that's fair. But who would you comp him to here? And do you think that's the player that he's going to end up becoming?
He reminds me a lot of Clay Matthews coming out of USC. Clay Matthews was under 6'3". He was 240 pounds with 32-inch arms. And when he was at USC, played all over, played a little bit of inside linebacker, played some outside linebacker, didn't have great production. He goes to Green Bay. He's playing on the edge. They move him around. They get him matched up against centers. And then later in his career, played more off the ball linebacker when they needed him to. I think that he's just an incredibly smart player that plays so hard. And I think one of the things that I really like about Jalen Walker is I know he's small, but he's powerful. And that's what I liked about Nolan Smith coming out of Georgia is you can see him set the edge at sub 240 pounds. We saw it in the Super Bowl where he's just blowing up those tight ends that are coming across the field to try to wham block them. Jalen Walker's got a lot more power than what Nolan Smith did. And I think a Clay Matthews type of role in the NFL. We've also seen New England have success with Kyle Duggar, who is a safety who's come down and played linebacker, or Jamie Collins, who played edge in off the ball linebacker, or Dante Hightower. These are all guys that Mike Vrabel's coached. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a similar success story in New England.
Man, I'm looking at this from the perspective of a Patriots fan and what I would want them to do. If I was a fan of the Patriots, you drafted Drake May. That is the future of your franchise right there. I can stomach my defense not being as good as I want it to be right now to make sure that Drake May. And to me, Marcus, that on Membu. And I don't care. I'm not going to let an old offensive tackle prevent me from drafting a guy. And I think that he can play left tackle good. He's that athletic. I mean, that is a selection that I would be running to turn my card in for if I was New England Patriots. I think you've got your decade-long tackle right there. And worst case scenario, we find out he's a better right tackle than left tackle. That's fine. I'm going to make him the one that's over there, and I'm going to make the veteran move. So that would be my thought process with that. To me, it seems a little counterintuitive to draft defense this early when your offense literally couldn't score at times last year, and you need to build around your rookie quarterback. So I think the philosophy is a little backwards.
I understand. Like I'm a big fan of Armand Membu, but again, maybe they feel like the best strategy forward is to use your second and third round picks to build the offensive line. And that to like Philadelphia's credit, that's kind of how they did it. They spent a second round pick on Cam Jurgens, a second round pick on Landon Dickerson. They got Mekhi Becton as a free agent. Use those picks to maybe build the depth in the overall talent. And I do think a guy like Gray Zabel is a really good player that you could get in round 2, or Tyler Booker or Josh Connerly. But I don't think you're going to find guys like Jalen Walker who are that versatile coming from a big time scheme. I'm good with either direction. I just won't be surprised if that's where New England ultimately ends up at the draft, is taking somebody like Walker because they like the offensive line talent more later in the draft.
Yeah, I think that that's a fair strategy. I would have a different approach, I think. But let us know what you guys think. If you have different comments about what the Patriots should do, what the Saints should do at pick 9, the things that we talked about today, drop them in the comments section below. I'm Tommy. That's Marcus. We go live every Monday at 11:30 12:30 a.m. Eastern time. Check us out on Stacking the Box and go watch our first show, which aired last Tuesday. Thanks for watching.